On April 8, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson created a federal agency, the National War Labor Board, which allowed arbitration between workers and its employers. With the support of the National War Labor Board, the right for workers to organize was firmly established.
The American Federation of Labor, also known as the AFL, was established in 1886 and led by Samuel Gompers, an English-born cigar maker. The AFL started to organize unskilled iron and steel workers into federal unions. This was in contrast to the Amalgamated Association of Iron, Steel, and Tin Workers, also known as AA, which organized skilled workers. The AA was created in 1876 on the heels of the growing steel industry and represented nearly 24,000 members by 1892. By 1900, membership had dropped to less than 8,000, and the AFL wanted to represent AA along with other unions. By 1918, the AFL began to pull together more than 24 trade organizations that made up the nation's steel mill. The AA had lost a strike in 1892 at the Carnegie Steel Company in Homestead, Pennsylvania, known as the Homestead Strike, which left 12 dead and dozens injured. The AFL wanted many unions under its umbrella, including the AA, so the AFL started to organize workers on the AA behalf.
Prior to the steel strike of 1919, in early 1916 in Youngstown, Pennsylvania, a strike broke out over a 25% increase in wages at the Republic II plant. The crowd of workers rebelled and destroyed property. The secretary of the AFL, Frank Morrison, visited the strike and took interest in organizing steelworkers, and in August of 1918 established the National Committee for Organizing the Iron and Steel Workers. The AFL members felt disillusioned with the idea of not striking. Many felt betrayed by their government and employers. Wages were low, the price of commodities were high, and working conditions were terrible. Members started to abandon the labor movement. Unless there was a strike, there was a fear that the union membership would lose momentum. The National Committee debated over if there would be a strike, with 93% approval for a strike by union members. Members would leave if the National Committee did not organize a strike. The National Committee set a date for the steelworkers' strike as September 22, 1919. The National Committee reached out to President Woodrow Wilson and to Judge Elbert Henry Gary, who was a lawyer, county judge, corporate officer, and one of the key founders of the U.S. Steel. Wilson was unable to influence business owners, and Elbert Gary snubbed the idea of a strike. Even though the strike date was set for September 22nd, President Wilson requested that the strike be postponed, and the National Committee could not ignore the enormous amount of telegrams stating that the strike needed to move forward on behalf of the workers. Fanny Sellens, a union organizer and garment worker, was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. She negotiated on the behalf of 400 garment workers. It was Fanny's ability to organize workers that caught the attention of a union representative working for the Steel and Coal Union. He hired Fanny, and in 1913 she moved with her family to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as a representative to recruit and organize on behalf of steel families living in western Pennsylvania and those working in the Allegheny Valley, which at the time was known as the Black Valley because of the violent oppression of its workers. While fighting on behalf of the workers, Fanny was imprisoned and charged with incitation to riot. After 6 months, she was released and pardoned by President Woodrow Wilson in December of 1916. Wilson felt that Fanny was defending the constitutional rights of the workers. On August 26, 1919, Fanny was assigned by the President of the United Mine Workers of America, Phil Murray, to recruit miners in the Allegheny-Kiski Valley. While there, Fanny witnessed the unmerciful beating of strikers in Brackenridge, Pennsylvania. These were members of the Allegheny Coal and Coke organization. The sheriff's deputies shot and clubbed strikers. While Fanny was trying to aid one of the injured, she herself became a victim. She was clubbed across the head, crushing her skull, then shot in the back and flipped over and shot in the head. A picture of her dead body was circulated around union meetings to show the brutality of anti-unions as well as the injustices of the political and police forces. In 1923, an Allegheny County coroner's jury ruled that Fanny's death was justifiable and commended Sheriff Haddock for protecting the property of Allegheny Coal and Coke against the strikers. Less than a month later, the steel strike began. The strike was made up of 24 trade unions and headed by John Fitzpatrick, the president of the Chicago Federation of Labor. Within the second week, the word spread, and an estimated 350,000 working in the steel and coal industry walked off the job. Starting in the western region of Pennsylvania, Bethlehem Steel Plant was shut down, as well as plants in Donora and Monessen. The reach across America affected the industrial workforce, removing 4 million workers from their jobs. The strike would sometimes be brutally violent. Officers would beat strikers, and in response, strikers threw bottles, destroyed property, and in the case of Fanny Sellens, were killed. In Newcastle, Pennsylvania, the sheriff, who was also the chief of police, admitted to arresting 100 people the first week of the strike and planned to hold at least 40 of them as quote-unquote suspicious persons, knowing full well that they were employees on strike. Employers would pit native workers against immigrants and tell the immigrants that they were sold out by the Americans. The African American and Mexican American communities were not able to join the AFL, so the Steel District hired about 40,000 African American and Mexican Americans as strikebreakers. This was the only way they could enter unionized jobs. Even though many of the strikebreakers were unskilled, it was done to send a message to the Pennsylvania strikers that the steel industry was stronger. U.S. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer would order a legal roundup of thousands of strikers and labor organizers. These became known as Palmer Raids. In the wake of the Red Scare, steel industry owners created a dialogue and published information that the union organizers were working under communist control. Attorney General Palmer warned publicly that the strike threatened Bolshevism. Because a lot of the steel workers were immigrants, the public's opinion was guided into believing that striking workers were untrustworthy and wrong. Public opinion turned against the steel workers. With pressures and difficulties of organizing town hall meetings and the powerful influences of the steel company, it was clear that the movement began to break down. Rumors were started informing strikers that other steel mills were in full operation and that workers had returned to their positions. If one mill had opened, it was rumored that all mills were open, even though untrue. With little information and the fear of organization, workers started to return to their jobs. After 10 weeks, the number of workers on strike had dropped to 110,000. The National Committee declared that on January 8, 1920, the strike would end. The strike led to a very small increase in wages and some improvements to working conditions. The union saw large decreases in membership. Many members did not see a big enough change. Union membership decreased as leaders pushed for more opportunity for collective bargaining. The steel strike of 1919 sent a clear picture to the steel industry that both sides needed each other. It was clear that the money controlled the working class, and it was the industry owner that had the financial upper hand to rule over workers' rights. With the representation of the union and participation by its members, major hurdles were cleared on behalf of the workers. These events laid the foundation for future labor movements.